dear guests of our regular several debates. This time we have the three very distinguished guests coming from three different countries, which took three different roads to tackle the COVID pandemics. And the purpose of this remote session is to assess those different roads and to make some judgments, you know, what kind of a decision making in such extraordinary times is ideal for the society. So if I just would go back in my memory a year ago, those three countries, in fact, had a very similar starting point, serving almost as a model for the others, with low number of cases, with low number of fatalities. But then, since that, their roads significantly diverged. Germany, to start as the largest one, for most of 2020, was a country which had managed the pandemics, I would say, in a rational, organized manner, and thus looks like as a winner in the EU at least, maybe alongside the Denmark or rarely populated Finland. But then early this year, a failure of the European Commission to guarantee enough vaccination on time, as well as the prolonged lockdowns and the federal structure of the state, causes growing nervosity among the German public, even so right in the middle of the third wave. Then there is the example of Israel, which started with a successful control during the first wave, then has enjoyed, I would say, a horrible impact during the second wave. And then in the late winter, started a speed, wide, and effective vaccination program that allowed the early opening and start of the recovery. So right now, Israel is definitely among the gold medalists on the global scale. And last but not least, there is the Czech Republic, which was passed by virus or bypassed virus during the first wave due to almost absolute lockdown during the last spring, that led the Czech Prime Minister to declare the Czech Republic as the best in COVID in the world. And then below the protracted chaos in autumn and winter, accompanied with the growing lack of trust between the society and leadership, which resulted in horrible number of fatalities, despite the long and protracted lockdowns, and despite the fact that, for example, the schools were closed in our country for almost all the period. So here we are. There is also one thing in common for all three countries, that those countries have the elections this year. Israel had already just a couple of weeks ago, while the Czechs and the German will face the parliamentary elections in September and October this year. So it's also worth of researching whether the election arithmetics is somehow influencing the decision-making too. And now, just very briefly, let me introduce our three speakers. Let's start with Germany and my, I would say, friend in the European Parliament, Peter Liese, who is not just a politician, but also a physician, a doctor who is maybe still having his praxis in Westphalia. He is a long-serving member of the European Parliament since 1994. He's a member of CDU, so in the EP is a member of the EPP. And we are together the coordinators in ENVI committee, which is not just for the environment, but also for the healthcare. So Peter is a coordinator for EPP group. Myself, I am the ECR, so we are in a almost daily contact. So Peter, welcome. Then Tommy Steiner is our Israeli guest, a political scientist from Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya, which is the best private school in Israel, and one of the Israeli leading experts on international security, a man who is broadly associated with an attempt to bring Europe and Israel closely together, and a real friend of our several institutions in Prague. And then last but not least, our Czech participant is Mirek Singer, who was living even as a neighbor in northwestern Bohemia for many years. Is a well-known Czech economist, but also the winemaker of the regional wine, a man who was a part of the team of this economic, famous Czech economic transformation throughout the 1990s, then was serving for 6 years as the governor of the Czech Central Bank, and now is in the private sector, both the leading economist and one of the directors of the Generali insurance holding, as well as the member of the board of Moneta Bank, one of the Czech leading banks. So we do have here a doctor, we do have a security strategist, we have the economist, we have also 3 politicians. So I think this ideal setup to have a broad range of views on this particular issue. And let's start with Peter. The floor is now yours.
Yeah, thank you, Sasha. Thank you very much for the invitation, but also for the good cooperation in the European Parliament. In fact, we are 2 different groups. Many times journalists call the EPP the conservative group. And then I always say, no, conservative group is another one. That is the one where Sasha Fondra is the coordinator. We are the Christian Democratic group. But yeah, in many cases, we have the same position, especially when it compares to the far left and the far right. It's much more pleasure to work with Sasha Fondra and his group. Yeah, how is the situation in Germany? Not good. We are in the middle of the 3rd wave now, and we are unfortunately not managing it good enough. Intensive care unit representatives tell us every day that it is a delicate situation. We are close to the peak of people in intensive care units in Germany that we ever had, because we have a strong 3rd wave, and unfortunately there is a lot of frustration, tiredness with the people. They don't adhere to the measures, and also politicians, in my view, didn't have the courage, especially at regional level. You know, we have a federal system. Angela Merkel is a scientist, and the head of the Chancellor's office is even intensive care unit doctor, and they had a good plan, but we have a federal system in Germany, and too long they tried to convince the regional prime ministers, and that really didn't work out. We are close to 80,000 dead in Germany, and that's, in my view, far too much. The good message is that even though we have almost the same amount of people that have been infected now in the 3rd wave, the 7-day incidence is quite close to the 2nd wave that we had about Christmas, December, and January. We have only less than 50% of the death rate. And this is because most of the people were dying in care homes for the elderly. And here we had a targeted start of our vaccination campaign. We started vaccinating in care homes end of December, and already for quite some time, everyone that lives in care homes for elderly is vaccinated even the second time. So that's why less people are dying, but we can not at all be happy. When it comes to the people that died, of course, we have to put it in perspective. In Germany, 80,000 people died. That's when you compare it with the other countries per 1 million, it's about 955 per 1 million. So about 0.1% of the population that died from COVID. In Czech Republic, it's more than twice when you compare it with the population. So your 28,000 people that died are 0.26%, 2,600 per 1 million. In Israel, it's already less. So that's why you see the difference, especially in the second and in the third wave. Congratulations to our Israeli speaker, because Israel is now doing very well. You are the world leader in vaccination, and we can learn from Israel, that's no doubt. On the other hand, we cannot copy-paste everything. You know, there was a very specific contract that has been offered to Israel, and according to my knowledge, not been offered to any other part of the world. So you had also some conditions that other countries didn't have. And I think the main point was a very, very organized, very digital healthcare system. So it was interesting for Pfizer. Even BioNTech didn't know how it worked out. The people that deal with vaccine in BioNTech couldn't tell me what was the reason why Israel was so fast. So it was also a personal engagement of Albert Bourla, the CEO of Pfizer. And I think we need to look at this, we need to learn lessons, but on the other hand, not to raise expectations that we cannot really meet because the situation couldn't be compared. The European Union is not doing good enough, or has not been good enough in the last 3 months. That's very clear. But I would like to put this also a little bit in perspective. You know, the common story is European Union messed it up completely. We are at the end of the world in vaccination, and this is because the European Commission made a mistake and they ordered too late and they didn't order enough. So that is the story. And I think there is only, I would say, 25% truth in this. There is truth in this, and Commission could have done better. But the first point to mention is that the member states played a big role. Unfortunately, or how should I say, Alex Fondra, the parliament was not involved, but also when we see what our colleagues from the left and from the Greens said in the parliament, they were also not very helpful. So the colleagues from the left only asked for transparency. Some of them said, how can you give any money to the European, to the industry? It should be done in a public domain. So there were colleagues in our committee for health that even made it complicated and didn't speak about how to get the vaccine. They only spoke about liability, they spoke about transparency and not giving any money to the industry. So that was also not very helpful, but the responsibility was not for the parliament, it was for the Commission and the member states. And there were many member states, including, as far as I know, many Central Eastern European member states that said, oh, don't invest in BioNTech. We don't believe in this technology. It's not proved. It's too expensive. It's difficult to handle. And that's why the Commission couldn't do what they wanted. They were also in a framework of member states' opinion that was not really favorable. But also, not everything is bad, and you have to put it in perspective. And here I would like to show some pictures to make it short, very short, but very clear, how we really stand. Maybe you can show the next slide. Yeah, this is the world in vaccination, at least major countries. You know, Israel, congratulations again, is the best. United Kingdom is very good, Chile and the United States. But then already, many European countries are already quite ahead. Look at Estonia, the Netherlands, Austria, Spain, Germany, quite in the middle with 16% vaccination compared to the citizens. And there are quite rich countries that are not developing countries, like Japan, like New Zealand, like Russia. Maybe it's not really a rich country, but they want to save the world with their Sputnik. They are far behind the European Union. And so it's not true that the European countries are the last. When you see the developed countries, we are quite in the middle. And of course, next slide, please. When you look at the global issue, you will find more than 150 countries that are behind the European Union. It's very clear, not only rich countries like Australia, Japan, but Africa is very clear that they are behind also big parts of Latin America. So we are not the loser of the world, but we are of course not the best, and there are lessons to be learned. Next slide. One of the reasons that has not been talked enough about it is that we are exporting a lot of vaccine, and other parts of the world that are ahead in vaccination do not export. So the United States has more production, and that's the lesson learned for the European Union. Why do they have more? We should have had at least the amount than the United States, but they export zero. We export almost half of what we produce. And this is especially making me angry when I look at the United Kingdom. United Kingdom is receiving a lot from the European Union. AstraZeneca has been, but fortunately we have stopped it. But also BioNTech, Pfizer, more than 50% of the vaccines administered in the United Kingdom have been produced at the continent. Next slide. Yeah, but I think the most important point is it's now changing. Germany has administered 800,000 doses of vaccine yesterday. So 1% of the German population got a shot yesterday, and that will continue until everybody who wants has been vaccinated. This quarter, quarter two, will make the difference. This is figures from the European Commission. Yesterday, it has been confirmed that BioNTech Pfizer will deliver not only 200 million doses for the European Union, but 250 million doses. AstraZeneca, they promised to deliver much more, and there's the main problem why it was so difficult in the first quarter, but for the second quarter, they already reduced the amount that they promised. It's only 70 million, but at least something. Johnson & Johnson, 50 million, Moderna, 35. And hopefully, this is not completely confirmed, but I have a close contact to the company, CureVac. They will come to the market, hopefully also in June. And then this figure will be even increased. So 410 million doses after we had already 100 million doses. This makes the difference. And when you look at Johnson & Johnson, there are some problems. I will come back if questions are arriving to that. But I guess that we can count on Johnson & Johnson, and then it's only one shot. So this means with the 410 million doses until the 1st of July, we can almost achieve 70% vaccination of the citizens in the European Union. So the target of the European Union to get at least 70% vaccinated by the end of the summer can probably be achieved even before. My last point, in Germany we have this debate, and I'm sure we have it in Czech Republic also. Many people say, why should I adhere to the measures? Why should I not meet friends, not party, whatever? The European Commission messed it up, so they are guilty when somebody dies. I think we all have to be careful. I'm a medical doctor, and normally there are exceptions. Yes, sometimes people die because the doctor made a mistake. But normally the doctor treats a patient where somebody else did a mistake. A car driver didn't take care, somebody had an unhealthy lifestyle. And when the doctors would say, okay, I'm not guilty, so I don't act, the doctor would be sued, it would be brought to court. So everybody who says the commission messed it up, that's why I'm not guilty when somebody dies from COVID-19, I don't want to take care anymore. He would behave like a doctor that says, okay, I'm not guilty, that's why I don't treat this person. I think we need to be patient, 2-3 months, then we are where Israel is now, and that should be our common target. Thank you.
Tommy, please tell us about something of the Israeli experience. In particular, what was the driving force behind this Israeli energetic and I would say also effective attitude towards the vaccination?
First of all, I have to correct one of your remarks, or potentially it's a correction, because you said that, Sasha, that there will be elections, Israel had elections and there will be elections in Germany and in the Czech Republic. Well, I am not sure that come autumn, we won't have another round of elections again because we're getting used to this. So the jury is still out on this. And I want to follow up also on Dr. Lisa's remarks, because, and he's right to point this out, Israel is a very unique case because, it hasn't done as well as our leader would wish us to consider when it comes to managing this pandemic. When we started receiving vaccinations at the end of January, I believe, mid-January, our healthcare system was on the peak of overflow. And our intensive care units were overflowing. And we, in that respect, got very, very lucky. And the impact of the vaccination was far beyond anything that anybody expected, including our healthcare officials. But there's two things that have to be said. First of all, we were in some extent lucky because Israel's healthcare officials were able to convince Pfizer that Israel is an ideal testing ground for the vaccine. It's a small island country, essentially, with an advanced and digitized HMO network, or I should say network, there are actually 3 HMO providers, four large HMO providers, that would turn over all their data of the vaccination and of whatever happens after the vaccination to Pfizer. Now, that is something, and this is, I see what Dr. Lisa was hinting to, that no other Western country, and particularly definitely no other EU member, could have done in terms of personal data protection rules. This can only be done in Israel. And again, the agreement between Pfizer and Israel is not transparent. It has not been published, at least not officially. So, and apparently we did overpay, And we promised to hand over all the data. So that is the reason why Pfizer gave, and it has little to do with the personal chemistry between the CEO of Pfizer and our Prime Minister, even though our Prime Minister thinks that that is indeed the case, and who could disagree with him. Now, I also want to point out that we did not do as well in terms of managing the pandemic, and we could have done much better. What made a difference in terms of the pandemic data, in terms of the recorded number of deaths as a result of COVID-19, is a very simple point. We have a relatively young population and a relatively small elderly population. Now, taking that into consideration, with the fact that we are essentially an island country with only one main point of entry, there is no reason to be so happy with our results. Now, and yes, COVID-19 played a large role in our politics. It was used and leveraged as a political tool by our Prime Minister, who, for those who do not know, is not only charged with corruption, but also facing trial on corruption charges. One of his methods to, how do I say it, politely cling to power, is to promote fear, crisis, anxiety, and COVID-19 was a perfect excuse last year to compel his previous rival contender to form a national unity government. And now he uses the vaccine success to shore up his political or his popular support. And politics also had a significant role in how we managed the pandemic, because ultra-Orthodox communities, or I would say their representatives in parliament, were very keen on protecting and easing the restrictions on their communities and their population. And as a result also of, how would I say it, with glaring failures of personal example when it came to leading politicians from our respected president down to the Prime Minister and on to members of his government and onwards, they themselves were not very good in complying with their own measures they were signed on. And that eroded public trust, especially after the first wave, in which there was high compliance of the public. In the second and third wave, public compliance was a challenge, especially in the second wave. In the third wave, when also the numbers of confirmed cases was high, rocketing very high, and the number of deaths were mounting. Then the public compliance improved, but still there was an issue of lack of trust. Now, another point was also international political considerations, because under pressure from the United States at the very early stage, Israel did not impose travel restrictions from those entering from the United States. And we were receiving hundreds of cases by day of people coming from the United States because Prime Minister Netanyahu simply could not stand up to the well-known pressure coming from then President Trump. So here again, it's another aspect of politics now, it's international politics. And in that respect, I think that when it comes to managing the pandemic, public trust is a major concern. We did not see waves of demonstrations against regulations as we see in Europe. But we also had an issue with compliance because of the eroding public trust. And again, we could have done much better, and we didn't. And the only thing is that becoming Vaccine Nation instead of Startup Nation, we got ahead now. We are actually on the verge of back to normal. But I remind us all that even when it comes to vaccinations, there's a reason why, for instance, New Zealand, there's a low rate of vaccination because you don't really need it in New Zealand. They simply cut off their country. They are an island country, and they imposed strict restrictions from the very beginning. And now they have, if I recall correctly, they have a handful of people that died from the pandemic in the past year. So, and that's a world of difference. But again, it's an island country. And that is where, this is what Israel should have aspired to. Countries like Australia, New Zealand, Taiwan, if you wish, and even Singapore, even though, and I'm not taking the less liberal countries as example, like Singapore and Taiwan, but New Zealand and Australia fared much better, and we could have done, and we could also. I'll stop here.
The last speaker in a row is Miroslav Singer, as I already said. So he was very active in the public debate in the last year, being among those who was in particular critical about this continuing lockdowns. As an economist, he brought the debate about, the balance between the costs and the benefits. So what is your opinion? What is your reflection, Miroslav?
Yes, I'm not a politician or a political scientist or a sociologist. I will more or less point out few statistical features that capture my attention on the situation. And I will also try not to state that much of what's known to our Czech kind of listeners base. But first, let me say that I believe that COVID statistics themselves are grossly misleading for cross-country comparisons, because they really depend on what is in a particular country measured as a COVID case. And that's perfectly seen. Let me give you one example that will be of interest to our German colleague. If I would believe COVID statistics as capturing all COVID situation, I would sadly point out that German health system somehow generates almost twice higher mortality from COVID cases than Czech system. And honestly, I don't believe that. I think Germany does not have worse treatment. We simply have very kind of generous qualification as a COVID case. That makes much more sense to me. And what therefore what one can compare, however, is a total excess above average mortality. And in this case, let me be clear. I mean, like we are, at least according to the Eurostat data, we are very likely to be the worst in last year, and this year, first months of this year are not going to change it. So we have the highest above normal mortality, total mortality, which obviously is related mostly to COVID pandemic. Okay? So that's something like to be kept in mind. But I do not truly believe in big value of comparing how number of positives develops without taking proper account to methodology of what constitutes the COVID case and how is testing going on. Second, I would not be apologetic to EU structures because we are all EU structure in terms of vaccination. Simply vaccination is EU disaster, sorry. This is the largest market in the world. And I'm not saying it's the country's government are not to be blamed. I mean, I'm talking the EU system as a whole. EU system as a whole completely misreacted to situation, and the result is that the richest market in the world is getting the slowest vaccination pace needed in situation out of the developed countries. And that's perfectly seen on who is the fastest on the European continent. It's not a rich country. It's not a European superpower. It's Serbia. Serbia managed to get faster vaccination pace than everybody else. Going for vaccination, it is its own sources, which quite frankly are not unlimited. And that's, for me, that's shocking. That's not that shocking, I must say, as an economist. I think too late, the pattern of solving the crisis too late without any courage, with kind of keeping its own bureaucratic position safe is a pattern of Europe. From Greece crisis, Greek crisis could be solved if the proper amounts of money would be allocated fast enough. The amounts of money that are actually spent in Greece crisis could be solved much faster. And this is the same and the same and the same. So this is Europe. I'm afraid. Yeah. And one aside, which I would simply like to hear the comment of Pierre-Elise. I have read today in news that EU quits ordering Johnson & Johnson vaccine. That it's not going to. If I would like simply to know what the situation is. Now, despite that, I've been, I believe, very critical on Czech loss of lives. I believe the situation, the future situation, the future risks, essentially put together Czech and Israel. And it seemed to me that even the fence of restriction and lockdowns now accepted that in Czech the situation is slowing down, not because government that much wisely blocked whatever right to move across districts we had, but simply because we really reached saturation point. So in this respect, what does it mean is that the risks of future development are relatively low for Czech and Israel at the same time, because both countries got some level of herd immunization. Israel through vaccines and East through simply virus going through the population with 30,000 deaths. Russian COVID statistics are hopelessly underestimated. Russians simply do not report most of the COVID cases they have. But they have mortality figures. And what's absolutely fascinating is that Russian above average total mortality from last year is similar to Czech levels. Any COVID statistics in Russia seem to be stable or falling. But at the same time, they had most of the last year and this year open schools, and they had open a lot of establishments we do not have open. I doubt even Israel probably doesn't have open. And I do not believe Russian healthcare system is better. I do not believe Russian demographic situation is better. And I do not believe Russian have a healthier population. And on vaccination, I completely believe. I mean, like Russia doesn't vaccinate itself. So that's a thing that makes me to pause and think, how comes that the country that simply didn't capture most of the COVID cases doesn't have a healthcare system of a sort of European standard, doesn't have a healthy young population at all. And they are somehow same in death toll per million people with open restaurants. And that's puzzling. Okay. On the other hand, I believe we are now on the opposite side for future kind of procedures. Both Germany and Israel have, I think, working tracing. They have some quarantine discipline. We simply do not have anything of this because I believe that we have even higher level of distrust, indiscipline, and disobedience of population, which is done in a Czech way, not on demonstrations, but in actual behavior of people. And we simply do not have security forces or police troops that are able to enforce the rules in terms of their numbers. So in this respect, I believe we will have to, for future developments, and I believe that's going to be probably very likely the task of future government to put tracing to that part and guaranteeing discipline. That means that stay at home if they got infected. And here I would stay.
One of the failure of the EU, in my strong belief, is that it did not appropriate enough money for research and development of the vaccination. You know, Donald Trump allocated $18 billion. Israelis were able to pay much more for Pfizer. The EU score, you know, given the fact that, you know, we approved a loan of 750 billion last year for recovery. But most of those money should go according, you know, the mainstream to saving the planet in 2050. But, you know, for saving the lives now, we were able to allocate just hundreds of millions instead of 20 billion like the US. And my question to you is whether you see at least some kind of a learning the lesson, because just this week we had a debate, you know, how much money to spend for development of the second generation of the vaccination, which, you know, could tackle the mutation. And there was some modest improvement, you know, first 150 million, then 1.8 billion, but it's still a peanut in comparison with what the UK or the US were able to allocate. So my question to you is whether, you know, this chronic disease of, you know, not having an adequate response, whether this continue or whether you believe that Europeans will be able to draw some lessons, because, you know, to save the life, politically, it's more important than to save the planet, you know, in 40 years from now.
As far as I understood, and that what you told me when you invited me, we are here in a panel of educated people. And I really ask you, everybody, also Miroslav Singer, to not use the yellow press speech. You know, just to say Europe messed it up, and I don't care who it was, and I just see that Serbia is doing better. This is just not the full truth. And we can spend this drinking a beer in a pub when the pandemic is over, having talks with our neighbors. But if this is an educated circle, please look at the details. And I will come to Sasha's question. Of course, there has been mistakes also with the European Commissions. But this story that is always told, the European Union messed it up and I don't care about the details. This is not why I'm in this meeting. So if you want educated debate, then please look at the details. And there are rich countries, there are countries that could have been better. Look at, for example, also Canada. They were not better prepared, and that it has to do with the export ban of the United States. Canada has got the vaccine from Europe and not from the United States. There are more points to be discussed than Europe messed it up and Europe didn't invest enough money. And Sasha, you should know it better. It is not true that the European Union only invested 2.7 billion euro for the vaccine. This was only the part of the advance purchase agreement that didn't cover the Horizon, that didn't cover the European Investment Bank. Already in the beginning of January, when nobody thought this is a serious issue, last year, the European Commission and the European Investment Bank supported the BioNTech Pfizer vaccine. And when you put everything together, not only the advance purchase agreement that has been funded by the European Commission, when you add what the member states are paying, you can calculate 30 billion. So this is another figure, 30 billion. That is the figure. You can still say it should have been more, and that's my second part of the answer now. The one advantage of the United States was that they have an agency called BARDA. And this is an agency where you can, without asking too many people, spend the money in the case of emergency. We didn't have this in Europe. My group asked to have a European BARDA in March last year, but I have to admit that you cannot create such an agency in 2 or 3 months. But the BARDA kind of thinking, that was missing in the European Commission partly, but it was mainly missing in the member states. I don't have information about the priorities of the Czech Republic, but I definitely know that Poland strongly was against buying BioNTech, and some other Central Eastern European countries also. And it was the Commission and some other governments, including the German government, saying, we need BioNTech, we need to go for it. And if you don't want it, we buy even more. So this has to be discussed and not only the simple story. We need the European BARDA. European Commission is making this proposal. It's called HERA, and we should push for it, and we should fight against the left and the Greens that always say we should not work with the pharmaceutical industry. And last point, Miroslav Singer has also mentioned the Johnson & Johnson point. Also here, try to be as precise as possible. It's difficult to understand everything, but it's very dangerous to see only the headlines. We need Johnson & Johnson now, immediately when FDA have checked the cases and EMA have checked the cases. I expect this for next week. We should continue to vaccinate, or we should start with Johnson & Johnson, and we should also continue with AstraZeneca. We need it because we need to stop this huge wave now. And the question is, for the next year, when we will have a situation like with the flu, where every year we need a new vaccine because the virus changed. There, the European Commission says the mRNA vaccine are the better ones. And that's true. They have less side effects, they are more effective, and they can be more easily adapted to the new virus. And that's the story. So nobody will stop delivering Johnson & Johnson or AstraZeneca. We have ordered 200 million doses, 200 million doses. 55 million doses will come to the 1st of July, and there's plenty of vaccine. Maybe we will even send it to the neighboring countries, which are definitely in need. For example, Russia. But for the future, for new treaties, it's the mRNA vaccine, and that's the right choice, I guess.
There is a lot of debate in the EU about, declaring the export ban. On the other hand, in our conversation with the CEOs of the companies, including Pfizer, for example, they argue that, their production, the composites, commodities are coming in from about 19 or 20 countries from all over the world. And if there is a further disruption of the global chains, it can get us even into worse situation. So what you are as an economist, what is your argument, in favor of, rejuvenating the domestic production or to keep the global market open?
Let me first thank Pierre for explanation on Johnson & Johnson, and also for reprimand to keep together with the facts. So let me quote you, Peter. Nobody will stop vaccinating with Johnson & Johnson or AstraZeneca. Well, effectively yesterday, as far as I know, Denmark stopped vaccination with AstraZeneca. So much about keeping this fact. So let's keep this fact. Yeah? And I find it absolutely fascinating that representative of German conservative right is against open foreign trade. This is fascinating. I think the decades of German success are based on open foreign trade. By the way, this is also part of our economy that's based on this and on German. I am really afraid where this can go. I mean, let's now not discuss vaccination, I would say, but if this is a feel in Germany that it's hard by open world market, we are for a big change in the world foreign trade. We are for a big change in the world economy. And I'm not sure whether this change will be beneficial to Germany. And I'm sure this change will not be beneficial to us.
Peter, do you want to react?
You know, I'm a free trader. I'm for open borders. But the problem is that we are short of vaccine also, not only, but also because major players in this game, especially the United States and the United Kingdom, are not exporting vaccine. You know, the vaccine that goes to Canada and Mexico comes from the European Union. It is produced in Germany and Belgium. And all the vaccine that is produced in the United States is vaccinated in the United States. And for the United Kingdom, it was even the situation that AstraZeneca, who has a contract with the European Union and doesn't deliver, they sent the vaccine from Belgium, Netherlands, Germany to the United Kingdom. And then they told us, oh, we don't have enough for you. And we cannot send it from the United Kingdom to the continent. That was the reason why the European Union made an export restriction, because I think it's right what the Commission said. We are not talking about cars or steel. We are talking about oxygen. We cannot live without this vaccine. And when we just export and others don't, then we have the problem that we had in the beginning of the campaign in the first quarter. And that's why it's good to change. And now it's going to change. And I'm quite sure that only the mentioning of an export ban is one of the reasons why companies are delivering now much more than it was in the first quarter. So I want open borders. Let's go back to open borders when everybody plays fair. But for a limited time, this export control mechanism is important.
Tommy, the question to you. You mentioned the successful digitalization of the healthcare in Israel as a breaking point factor. And I agree, this is the same what I have heard from Pfizer CEO, from AstraZeneca, from others, that your level of digitalization of healthcare is really the 21st century, while in the EU we are in the 19th century, to put it provocatively. And, you know, in Czech Republic or Germany, it's more or less the same. And tell me one thing, because the attempts to have more digitalization in the healthcare in Europe is facing a huge opposition from those who are arguing, you know, for privacy protection. And, you know, in the healthcare is really delicate, sensitive issue. So what is your response? Is this a Israeli mentality as a country which is in permanent war, that, you know, fighting the war in this particular area and protecting the life is more important than the privacy, and thus in Israeli democracy, the public opinion does not oppose, or the political forces does not oppose the digitalization as much as, for example, in the European Parliament, which is, you know, well known for the opposition to this.
I said from the beginning that an agreement that Israel reached with Pfizer could not have been reached with any other European country, simply because of data protection rules and regulations. And I'm not sure if we should be proud about it, but privacy data protection is not a top priority in Israeli society, so it seems. Having said it, it doesn't mean that our HMO system is governed by, you know, it's completely loose out in terms of personal information, you know, at the end of the day. But apparently is very efficient. The first time I understood that this is far more efficient than its European counterparts is only now. But, I take it, I guess, for granted that I send an email to my physician if I need, regular medication. He sends me back an electronic prescription with which I simply go to the pharmacy, and the pharmacy passes my card, and then it sees what prescriptions I have, and it issues them, the medication on spot. And yes, in the Israeli case, there was an understanding agreement to do intrusive actions, even more than what we're talking about here. The Israeli Security Agency received authority to do tracing of individuals who came who encountered people with COVID-19. I mean, the Israeli Shin Bet had authority to track people and that is intrusive. And despite some opposition, it went through, even though it's questionable how effective it was. So yes, the Israeli society compared to European society is far more, willing to sacrifice its personal data protection or personal liberties for, greater, what it considers to be greater good in terms of the society and healthcare or well-being. But again, this is not something that can be really easily copy-paste from one place to another. First of all, I think we have more trust in the government in not peddling our information. If you ask me, was I concerned about the fact that the Shin Bet, the Israeli Security Agency, could track anybody I met with through my cell phone or whatever, and how he did it doesn't matter. I have nothing to hide. I have nothing to hide. So why should I be cared about what a guy is looking for? If he, actually, it could help me. If I didn't know that somebody standing with me in the elevator had COVID-19, it's actually good for me. I don't think it's bad for me. I've, my personal liberty or personal health and survival. Well, it can be liberal and dead, but or the other.
I wanted to raise the issue of how different United States and Britain approach the development of vaccines. In the States, a former pharmaceutical CEO was in charge. In Britain, it was a biotech venture investor. I wonder if this is something which simply isn't possible in the conditions of the European Union, where you've got high level, no doubt, highly competent and experienced, but it's a bureaucrat. It's a bureaucrat who's used to dealing with rules and enforcing rules, not investing. And then you've got individual states who, where no single states can be sure that it's or their responsibility to go for it. I wonder if it's even possible under the political conditions of European Union to match the effort that the United States and Britain made, and aren't the reason really deeply political, as opposed to competence, technological prestige, and so on. I think it's deeply political.
Yeah, there's some truth in what you say. European Union should have been more active and more forward-looking, and I think this is one of the most important lessons to be learned. But on the other hand, I don't know how the discussion was in the Czech Republic. In Germany, the yellow press very much attacked also the three ladies that were in charge of this operation: Ursula von der Leyen, Stella Kyriakidis, the health commissioner, and mainly Sandra Gallina. She's a main negotiator. And, she was really subject to nasty attacks because she is an interpreter by education. But I think that is really dangerous to judge people by their study that they did 20 years ago. You know, many people qualify during the job. They have additional courses, and that you are a trained interpreter doesn't mean that you don't have an idea how to negotiate. She was in fact doing the Mercosur deal between the European Union and Mercosur, like Brazil and Argentina. So she knows how to negotiate. Maybe somebody could have told her, and there are the member states to blame, and maybe also others in the Commission, that the main purpose is to get the vaccine and not to get the lowest price. So that was the story. But to specify what I mean, Sasha, with this money, 2.7 billion came from the ESI. That was a pre-financing. But in the contracts, it was already clear. And the Commission is unfortunately very polite. They say we cannot tell the money, because we cannot tell the price for the individual vaccine. But when you calculate, now the price is public. Somebody from Belgium, from the government, published it. You add the 2.7 and you calculate, you get the 30 billion euros. So there is a huge investment in vaccination in Europe. But it should have been earlier and more structured, maybe. But when I really get angry is when people like Beata Szydło criticize the European Commission. You know, the Polish government was one of the biggest problems. They didn't want to invest. They wanted the cheap vaccine, not the BioNTech one. And that's why there was a problem, including other issues like liability and so on.
Honestly, I believe that this case with the money Europe has is more related to what I call the European system, by which I by no means mean only European Commission. It's simply multi-level system in which a lot of players, including, I'm sure, Polish government, French government on Sanofi, and other governments have a big says, and the result in crisis. And that's the same like in the economic crisis I witnessed from 2008, is that the continent, or if you want, EU as a whole, as a system of states and its own EU structures reacts typically in a way too late, and that makes things first ineffective and then very expensive. So let me just answer to your question. As a matter of fact, you gave to all three of us. I'm perfectly positive Europe will be perfectly prepared with the highest money spent for next virus crisis somewhere in the second half of next year. I'm somehow afraid it will not be prepared at all to new crisis that's going to come in the world.
I share the same concern, but in fact, just to make one comment, when I asked Pfizer about the financing, surprisingly, you know, they did not get any money from a War Speed fund appropriated by Donald Trump. When they used their own money, or they went also to the capital market, but they did not, you know, this most successful company out of this race of the vaccination, they did not get any money neither from the EU. If you are not omitting this German money to BioNTech research, they found the money on their own, and that's the US company. Thank you, Mirek. Thank you, Tommy. Thank you, Peter. I wanted, you know, to bring together a bit different cultures, the culture of the European Parliament with the culture of the Czech capitalism, with the culture of Israeli security forces. I think that it perfectly illustrated the differences. Good luck, everybody, and see you again soon.